Ahsoka, Balance of Truth, Book 2. Chapter 6. ISB Deputy Director Walker Audenhoen sat upright in his high-back chair, watching several threads of text and associated images update themselves in real time. His hands were a blur of motion as he either added information of his own or sought higher-level threads of data feed from his core of assigned agents, performing similar duties within their own sectors across the galaxy. Enacted protocols across the Empire exponentially assisted his very methods of data extraction. These protocols, a testament to the Empire's commitment to efficiency, eliminated the need for pre-approvals and authorizations previously necessary to cross-reference valid data. They also allowed him to act, if necessary, without deferring to combating ego and pride. The large monitor within the desk before him continued trailing lines of text that read in headline fashion, Walker assigning each a threat and security level, and finally, a caseworker. Each caseworker addressed these lists in the order of importance he selected, a testament to his meticulous planning and foresight. He kept for himself those he designated as elevated risk or requiring massive assets to contend with. Striking the task key, the groupings of gathered incidences were sent to each respective caseworker as the scrolling lines of text ceased displaying on his monitor. He would resume from where he left off with the next DD to access the string. Audenhoen had his day before him, spread between 7 cases that were all transpiring in real time. Selecting each across his desk with the touch of his long, substantial fingers, they sprang to holographic life within his office, offering him the opportunity to both get out of the uncomfortable chair and walk among the cases that were either simple strings of text only, or in most cases full images with occasional video feeds and lines of informative detail. Reading through the first image, which consisted of text only, he assembled a small strike force of 3 Architon's light cruisers and an aging acclimator assault vessel within the Abrion sector to respond to an incursion into Imperial mining interests on Rishi Moon. His task was to determine the nature of the incursion and who the responsible parties were. Any suspected rebellion involvement was deemed the highest priority and harshest retaliation. Watching the selected hollow image revert to an affirmative green, he retrieved a glove from the top left drawer of his desk. He slid it over his right hand, each digit ending in a succession of 3 small discs, illuminated with a tiny pinprick of blue light. Audenhoen pulled at his brilliant white tunic with his left hand to straighten the crease that had materialized when he stood, the material conflicting with the broad shoulders and chest beneath. He focused his intense brown-eyed gaze on the green image and touched 2 of the discs together between thumb and forefinger, making a sweeping motion toward the desk. The image itself disappeared as its hollow emitter switched off. Walker's intensity kicked up a notch as he surveyed the following case file he had selected for himself. "Chule Ru," he said through thin, taut lips. "I have you, finally." He almost lost focus as his mind wandered to the suspected rebel collaborator and confirmed arms dealer. "I told you I'd have the last word," a case that could have easily been handled by one of his junior officers. Rue had been a particular thorn in his side since the incident on Charos some time ago, one that resulted in the disappearance of an Imperial weapons cache that had then been used on the other side of the galaxy in a well-organized prison break on Kaal. Walker's ruminations resulted in the crooked smile adorning his face. He looked at the accompanying data within the rotating image of the Klaatuinian, its prominent forehead and squat canine facial features betraying the intensity of the man's mental acuity. The arms dealer was being followed without a misstep by asset number 613. No other designation or name was given. Walker touched his throat to enable a 2-way link to the asset on the ground. "Asset 613, he said with a deadpan monotone. 613, a voice echoed throughout the austere office. Walker continued watching the live feed as his asset responded, Rue in full view from a rooftop vantage point. the buildings in view all dark in color with wide open frontages, other beings of differing species mingling within across small tables, eating, drinking, and inaudibly laughing. He was impressed with his asset's feed. Detain or extermination? The voice asked. Exterminate, Audenhoen said without hesitation. This ends here and now, he thought. He precisely knew the cadence of directives that would need answers, so he continued. Public, i.e., Walker finished. There was no response from the asset, only a slight shift in the perspective Walker was unblinkingly staring at. Within that exact second, the Clatuinian had ceased walking forward and was now headless, the remainder of the body falling haphazardly to the ground. Several patrons of the establishment seen through the footage scattered with arms raised while others sat motionless where they were, a state of shock triggering as parts of the Clatuinian slid from their chests and laps. With a broadening smile, he watched as the scoured perspective offered him a quick view of the sky, then terminated with a band of static before a flashing line of text reading "Link expired" flared across his view. Audenhoen blew out a breath, extinguishing with it the smile he knew he wore, one that betrayed his professionalism. He swept the hollow image from his view with another wave of his hand, returning himself to steadiness. Although there were 5 remaining cases, he chose to deal actively with the case that had piqued his interest from the beginning, a suspected data breach. They didn't come to his attention often, but when they did, he always chose them for himself, eliciting an odd form of satisfaction, knowing that his adversary was, at the very least, cerebral. This incursion occurred in the Belsmith sector on a moon called Trunnion, which orbited the gas giant of the Bodijev system. Cerebral and courageous, Audenhoen said to himself. He filed through the details of the small Imperial outpost currently hosting the incursion, finding that the outpost had been decommissioned 2 weeks ago, yet still constituted a platoon of stormtroopers. Detailed intelligence involved with the case informed him that supply and debarkation vessels had been rerouted for other unspecified purposes a week ago, despite the enormity of the Imperial presence on and around Bodijev itself. Cerebral, courageous, and resourceful, he amended his earlier comment, wondering how much information those performing the data breach possessed of Imperial protocol and directive. Those actively participating in the incursion were very close to the core files and would need to be erased within seconds to prevent data mining. Walker took the initiative and personally accessed and wiped the outpost data link to the Imperial networks, leaving the galley files for the commissioned officers intact for the day. Knowing the facility had already been decommissioned, he checked through accessible Imperial assets he could assign to, at the very least, remove the contingent of troopers left on base. Despite the teeming shipyards orbiting Bodijev, availability was slim, causing him grave concern. Either someone else was utilizing the same system he was and had already acquired a broader number of available assets, or there was a flaw within the system. Either way, he would have his work cut out for him today. The first available vessel was the Tangible, which for some reason was already heading for the moon. Following the same steps before, he assigned the vessel to respond to the data incursion. The hollow image showed its familiar green shade for a few seconds before flickering to a flashing red. What the hell? He heard his voice echoing through the room. The Tangible had gone from affirmative to compromise through meticulous algorithms in seconds. He quickly attempted a real-time comlink to the vessel and looked just as promptly at a link terminated message at the bottom of the image. Although it meant little in the grand scheme of the Empire to lose a ship, the speed and acuity necessary to pull off the intricate heist in the little time it had occurred left a very uneasy feeling coursing through the deputy director. The action, he knew, required an incredibly detailed skill set. He stepped back and hardened his muscular frame, folding his hands behind his back akimbo. He furrowed his brow, pinching the numerous time-earned wrinkles into several ridges of mental resolve. Walker raised his head slightly toward the ceiling above. Verbal instruct, list, equivalence, and likeness to archive. A new hollow image appeared before him as he immediately lowered his gaze to the blank field after issuing the precise filters. First inclusion, signal manipulation. Second inclusion, data manipulation. A lightning-fast list of names sped across his view, slowed only by adding the second filter. Third inclusion, imperial affiliation. The list slowed, allowing him to catch and comprehend a few of the names. He brought his left pointer finger to his left temple, rubbing vigorously as he contemplated his next addition. Fourth inclusion, coding/slicing expertise, he decided. The list refreshed itself once again, the names scrolling much slower from top to bottom as the fourth parameter established itself within the query at the upper left-hand corner of the image. A wave of revulsion coursed through his body as he watched the list scroll past his view. Although the list was comprehensive regarding the Imperial databanks, the thought that any Imperial could be the offender in this incursion sickened him. He had to remind himself that the AI behind the algorithms was unbiased, which brought another level thought to his parameter set. Fifth inclusion, Imperial defection. The list of potential suspects was whittled from millions to less than 3,000 in minutes. Although daunting, the opportunity to correctly identify the perpetrator or perpetrators was at least taking shape. Audenhoen scanned through the names slowly while contemplating further filters to add to his query, feeling that his sought answers were within his reach. Those potentialities seemed to grow daily, however. He could not help but pause for a moment to reflect on the overall boldness the rebellion had adopted since the destruction of DS1, how they plucked certain victories from apparent defeat. He felt his muscles tense involuntarily, his heart picking up as it hammered away in his massive chest, and the beads of sweat forming on his brow. Walker Audenhoen had been down this mental path numerous times during the last 2 standard weeks, its supposition leading him to the same conclusion more times than he wanted to admit. Sixth inclusion, Imperial collaboration, he said through clenching teeth. His list refreshed itself as expected, but only eliminating 0.1% of its contents. Seventh inclusion. He began to utter the parameter he knew would shore up the potential parties as the sixth hollow image began chiming to his right, emitting a shrill chirp to get his attention as designed. Hold audio, he prompted his current project, tapping his right thumb and forefinger again. He walked within the sixth image, gathering the details from the surrounding text, and slapped his left hand onto his sweat-drenched forehead. The real-time actions aboard the tangible placed this case in step with the case he had been working through. The ship had been compromised from within after a brief skirmish with a Lambda-class shuttle, which had been rerouted from Bodijev. Again with Bodijev, he thought to himself. He clicked the disc between his right thumb and right ring finger, prompting the image to respond to his verbal requests. Shuttle's point of origin? He asked, and the image responded with a simulated flight path and trajectory originating at the Trunnion moon. Video associated? He queried. A smaller image in the lower right corner showed a forward view of the shuttle's cockpit from the bulkhead behind the pilot's seat. A capped pilot was doing his best to navigate sparking control banks as an officer tried to extinguish a small fire erupting from the comm suite. Audenhoen watched with anticipation as the light cruiser in question began to consume the forward view. Freeze image, Walker stated, watching as the image became a snapshot. Understanding dawning on him, he could interpret the cruiser's actions as nothing more than protocol. The shuttle's comm suite was out of commission, and although being tended to, it would prevent the shuttle from responding to either hails or coded protocols. Although he understood the cruiser's response, specific details of corresponding directives remained either overlooked or neglected. Switching his attention back to the main image, Walker clicked together the thumb and index finger, enabling any active cams aboard the cruiser. 5 different vantage points were available, and he could view them in real time or cached memory. He placed his right hand within the assemblage and touched them all with his forefinger in random succession, commanding them all, for the moment, to relay what was transpiring in real time. Audenhoen saw several shadows blaze past each image, nothing decipherable from any of the perspectives until he turned his attention to the central portion of the bridge cam. 2 helmeted perpetrators worked furiously at their respective consoles, one with a data pad in hand sporting an umbilical link to the central data terminal. their silhouettes looking decidedly Mandalorian. A diminutive astromech, access appendage in full engagement with the ship's central computer, twisted his dome feverishly before centering its photoreceptor upon the vantage Audenhoen was watching the action through. Instinct kicked into high gear within the deputy director as he manipulated his gloved hand in a feverish cadence of finger and thumb taps. An aggressive expression stole over Walker's facial features as he digitally fought the efforts of the astromech in view, its photoreceptor shifting from a bright blue to an angry red in response. Although diligent and adept at his duties, he knew he was no match for the processing speed of even the older models of mech droids. With exasperation wearing him down, he decided to add the ship to the growing list of compromised vessels, but not before hijacking all of the data files from the cam-stored cache. He quickly swung his gaze back to the frozen image within the third case file he had been working through and studied it momentarily. Shifting his gaze then between the two several times, Audenhoen clenched his gloved right hand, spread his thumb and pinky finger outright, and brought them slowly together, causing both case files, their hollow presentations, and associated data to merge into a solitary event. The new, cohesive image froze in place briefly before displaying everything in an overlapped jumble. A chime in his ear alerted him that his data pull from the archived cam index had been completed, and he looked upon the cam view of the bridge again with renewed anticipation and awareness. Walker studied the astromech briefly, noting the color pattern and any other distinguishable features it presented, and prompted the display to capture and store still images with slight finger taps. Although most rogue astromechs sported differing appendages, this one was new to him. He prompted the view to close in on the appendage to capture and store a close-up of its composition before closing in on the two Mandalorians. Specific colors were lost through the cam's ability to process with minimal light. However, a colorful presentation that resembled a game board and a prominent 5 centered upon the figure's right pauldron caught his attention. Audenhoen prompted the still capture several times, closing in on the image as one of the shadows from a different feed stopped and turned to face the camera head-on. The individual within the cam's frame did nothing to hide her features as she stared directly into its hardware. She smiled briefly before training a blaster directly into the feed Audenhoen was studying. He staggered back involuntarily as the image was instantly filled with static. As if on cue, the static laced each live feed he had at his disposal throughout the image. The ISB deputy director from his tumescent office deep inside Central HQ within the Compnor Arcology on Coruscant had just witnessed, for the first time, a real-time hijacking of an Imperial asset by a rebel incursion. Another chime rang in his ear, snapping him from his ill-timed reverie. "Audenhoen," was all he said. "Sir, one of the cases you assigned me may be linked to one of you are currently involved in." A female voice filled his head, one that was filled with decisiveness and systematic calculation. "Proceed," he responded. "I lost tracking completely on a Gozanti I had been monitoring about 5 minutes ago standard. The ship itself is not what prompted my attention so much as what it holds, or what I believe it to hold." Audenhoen knew full well she had more to add, but was intensely curious about her perceived link to his casework. Without his prompting, he waited patiently. "Bodejeff," was all she said, all she needed to say. A thought gripped his focus momentarily. "Lieutenant Sigurn, contain your activities and head to my office, please. 2 heads are going to be better on this," Walker said with sincerity, knowing the dangers of embracing pride over wisdom. He turned his attention to the increasingly alarming and exponentially widening case scope. He immediately pulled up 2 still images of the woman who turned her gaze into the cam with purpose, and that of the Mandalorian pauldron. 2 simple clicks on his fingers isolated the 2 still captures within the main image and enlarged them to fill the area with their detail. There were more than enough data points, Walker knew, to identify the woman's face with extreme accuracy, so he decided to begin with the Mandalorian pauldron. Breaking down each segment of the still before him, he addressed the massive data cache at his disposal to identify the ring-checkered pattern. He only had to wait a few seconds before his first match. The return information was far more than he expected, displaying the name Sabine Wren and a triple digit accuracy percentage. Providing she is the one wearing the armor, he amended the findings verbally, doubting anything displaying 100% accuracy. The prominent five was left in limbo, as the algorithms working in concert had already agreed on the sum of their findings. Disregard subject identity. What am I looking at? He verbally commanded the AI, working in concert with his efforts. The image flickered 3 times before resolving several checkered patterns into his view in various geometric assemblies. It's a Dejeric board, sir, Lieutenant Areti Sigarin's voice sounded out behind him. And the five, he responded without turning around, would only have meaning to the wearer, I would assume, she answered right away. Sabine Wren, she mused from his right shoulder, member of Phoenix Squadron, Spectre Cell. She continued following the trail of text, succeeding a rotating image of the Mandalorian. Fifth member of the cell, she surmised. With an agitated finger, Walker tapped his bottom lip. Possibly, and I honestly can't think of a better explanation, he said a few moments later. Let's assume it is, in fact, a game board, he added, changing the nature of the collaborative effort and refocusing on the image of the woman that had already been identified. Captain Miara Larte, he said aloud, Alderanian, displaced refugee, has been with the Planetary Guard for over a decade, decorated with multiple merits. Ace fighter pilot, already read aloud for both of their benefits. And the information you wish to share? Audenhoen asked. She walked toward the image and opened her right palm, relinquishing the data she had brought with her. The image flickered again while the AI digested the added information, adding the newer data to what was already presented. As the lieutenant had suggested, the details of the lost Gozanti transport, originating from Bodijeff, were less critical than the origination of the detailed report. A mobile command center? He was baffled. What in the star's name would anyone need that for? Sensing the intense rhetoric within the question, Sigurn didn't answer directly. Sir, the relevance now is the nature of the command center. It is currently irretrievable, untraceable, incommunicable, and deeply rooted in the Imperial network and data cache. Walker Audenhoen's jaw dropped as he spun his head to face the lieutenant. This is considerably deeper than vessel appropriations already. He paused momentarily, looking toward the floor, up at the image before them, and finally back into her eyes. The moment we task this case with connecting these leads, we head down a path we either may not like or may not maintain control over. He blew out a breath, turning his head slowly toward the image again that had consumed his life for the last 20 minutes, knowing full well his following actions could either be case cracking or career ending, perhaps both if the information was sensitive enough. Sir, I should tell you now, I've directed a subfile to contain each element individually, Areti said without reservation. Audenhoen nodded his head agreeably, realizing without a thought that she was one step ahead of him, but more importantly, she understood what was at stake. Nodding one last time toward the lieutenant, he turned his gaze toward the image. Amalgamate, he instructed. The image flickered a few times before connections were made to a location, and finally, the rotating image of a Togrutan female. Ahsoka Tano, Raeda, Lieutenant Areti Sigurn said just before the entirety of the image collapsed into itself. The hollow emitter flashed to establish a data link before closing altogether with an audible chirp. The remainder of the images in the office awaiting his attention followed suit, casting the room into darkness. Deputy Director Audenhoen, report to Interim Director Admiral Coburn immediately. The intra-office comm broadcast through the entirety of the complex. Well, here we go, Deputy Director Walker Audenhoen spoke into the air before him as he removed the glove, tossing it onto his desk. Keep working, but be careful already, he added as he reached the door to his office quickly with his long strides. You'll be fine, sir, she returned. I hope you're right, he answered and stepped into the corridor beyond the door, leaving Lieutenant Sigurn alone in the darkened office.